The gaming industry's attempts at downplaying The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is never going to work. I have gone to great lengths over the past decade to emphasize that a lot of the highly criticized, highly panned, the hated Nintendo exclusives of the yesteryear, stuff like the original Pikmin and the original Luigi's Mansion, stuff like Beautiful Joe, or The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, or even something like Star Fox Zero, right? Like, I have gone to great lengths emphasizing how those games, the most hated Nintendo games ever made, have gone on to become like classics in their own right and are highly regarded among the community. Like The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword did 5 million units on Switch. After a decade-long hate campaign trying to pretend that like the game killed the series or something, right? It is remarkable how over the past decade Skyward Sword has kindled a dedicated following of people who really love and appreciate the game for what it is, in spite of the insane conspiratorial NeoGAF-led nonsense that that this game was disappointing, that it couldn't compete with other games that came out around the same time period, that like it killed the franchise, right? Like people may like half-heartedly try to say that like Wind Waker was bad, or that like the N64 had no games, but it's very evident, seeing how enthusiastic people are for Nintendo Switch Online and games like the N64 service and everything that's been happening lately. Like, it cannot be more obvious that the commonly held narratives that Nintendo is pro censorship, or that Nintendo doesn't have third party games, or that, these Nintendo IPs are stale, outdated, and can't compete with other franchises. Like, it cannot be more obvious that this is not true in the slightest, right? These games continue gaining new fans decades after the fact. It is remarkable seeing something like Donkey Kong Country, a game that is almost 30 years old, still getting new fans to this day. I'm always seeing people playing Donkey Kong Country and discovering it for the first time and realizing that this is a top tier platformer. It is more than just a game that was a technical showcase for the time, right? Donkey Kong Country is a masterpiece and is an excellent entry level title to get people into 2D platformers and showcasing why they are still viable. And going into like Super Mario Bros. Wonder release, I think a lot of people are going to be blindsided by just how popular and successful that game is because of the popularity of stuff like Donkey Kong Country, like the original Super Mario Bros. Games, the new Super Mario Bros. Games. Like, these games are a lot bigger and more successful than anyone can possibly understand. I think people are like greatly understating just how popular Super Mario Bros. Wonder is going to be. And what's more, I also think needs to be acknowledged is that people don't understand that this also extends to the good games that have already come out, right? Stuff like Super Mario Odyssey, stuff like ARMS, stuff like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. These games are going to be talked about and played long after the Game of the Year awards are given out. Like that's kind of the issue we're seeing right now with people like trying to say that Starfield is going to win Game of the Year, or Baldur's Gate 3, or Hi-Fi Rush, or whatever, right? Starfield. Like, that's something that people don't realize, is that like once the Game of the Year awards are given out, nobody's talking about these games anymore. They're not remembered, they're not talked about, and if anything, people kind of look back critically towards a lot of past Game of the Year contenders. You have stuff like Dragon Age Inquisition, you have Sekiro, you have like all of these games that have come out and just been completely forgotten, right? There is no defending the current state of the industry. And what people don't realize is that the Game of the Year awards is meaningless. Like, the only reason people talk about this at all is that it gives their like really terrible games more credibility, right? Like, it's the only reason that anybody talks about like most of these games, more than like a couple of months after launch, right? But with something like Tears of the Kingdom, it transcends all of that, right? Tears of the Kingdom is going to be talked about and played years after the fact, right? You know, just like Breath of the Wild has been. And like that has been like the big cope campaign since this game came out, is that like, oh, nobody's talking about Tears of the Kingdom. Nobody cares about this game. Like my kid isn't playing this game religiously after beating it, but like they don't really realize that this game like is extremely successful, that this game has maintained a dedicated audience, and that more and more people are going to discover it over time, to the point where like it is going to be considered one of the best games ever made in spite of the narrative around it, right? Like you can like clog your ears and close your eyes and just ignore reality all you want, but this game is being talked about. This game is being played. This game is being enjoyed far more than stuff like Baldur's Gate 3 or Starfield or Armored Core 6. But all anybody can talk about is like what game is going to possibly defeat Zelda for Game of the Year contender. Like they're not acknowledging that. First of all, that Zelda is Game of the Year, like in and of itself. But secondly, that like Tears of the Kingdom is the sort of title that transcends this year, right? This is going to be a game that is played and enjoyed for a very long time, and most people right now are refusing to admit it.